On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse, we talk with an abuse survivor named Poppi. And Poppi was married to a goalpost moving abuser. It's a story of jealousy, silent treatments, entitlement, being good enough, and survival mode. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Poppi. How are you?
I'm doing great, Brandon.
Well, thank you for being here, and if you want to be a guest like Poppi is today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and click on the guest form button at the top of the page, and there you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all, and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button, and please do send it in the format that we ask for. And we do have a content warning for today's episode, for today's survivor story, as we do discuss sexual coercion, sexual abuse, and suicidal ideation in this episode. So that is our content warning for today. And today you're going to hear Poppi's story. And Poppi endured 20 years of abuse from her spouse, and she was having trouble recognizing that what she was dealing with was actually abuse. And I know many of you out there are going to really resonate with what she has to say today. So a big thank you to Poppi for being here, and I'm going to get it my way and your way. Poppi, the floor is now yours.
I wanted to start by saying I'm so happy to be here on this podcast. I had started listening when I was still in my relationship, in my marriage with my abuser, and it really helped me a lot. So I feel so grateful today to be on this side of it and to hopefully be able to help someone else. I wanted to start with a little bit about how I grew up. I was the fourth of 5 kids. My family was in a very strict Christian religion, and this religion was very patriarchal. I was taught that families are forever, and because of that, that divorce was something that was like very awful, very devastating, and the reason was because it destroyed families, and that was kind of at the center of it. So my path, ever since I was little, was to marry someone in my faith and then stick with them through good times and bad times. And in this religion, I really was expected just to be like a wife and a mother and support my husband. No one I knew growing up had parents who were divorced. None of my friends' parents were divorced. I did have one aunt who had divorced before I was born. And this was like a huge family tragedy. I don't think she had ever really fully recovered from this. And that was my one experience knowing, about divorce. In my childhood, our entire lives were centered around our church. I don't really remember going on family vacations other than maybe like 1 or 2 small little ones. Everything was church activities. I learned really early in my life that either to not have needs or to put my needs last, and that my worth as a person was dependent on what I did for other people. And while obviously like learning to help people is important and that's something you should learn as a kid, this was definitely taken to an extreme. My parents were very, very conflict avoidant. I never remember my parents arguing. Literally, I don't have a single memory of my parents arguing in front of us. And it definitely was not because they had this healthy relationship. I think it was just the other person would just quickly agree or just like push it aside. So that it wasn't that it was resolved except through just ignoring the problem, essentially. My mom wasn't really present. She was super busy running a household of 5 kids. My grandparents lived next door, so she would help take care of them. And she had really very bad anxiety. My dad, he grew up in a very physically abusive household. And while I wasn't aware of this as an adult, he wasn't physically abusive to us. He would get angry like in a split second. So we did feel like we were walking on eggshells around him, and all of us kids were a little bit scared of him. Guilt and shame were the main form of discipline when I was growing up. So of course we've all probably heard Guilt tells you that something you have done is bad, and shame is that you are bad. And that's really how I grew up, is feeling like I was bad, like I was a bad person. And even though I was looking back, and I have my own kids now, I see that how much this affected everything I did on a daily basis. I didn't feel like I belonged in my family. I didn't feel like I really belonged anywhere. Now I know that what I experienced then was childhood emotional neglect. So if you haven't heard of the term childhood emotional neglect, it's a form of neglect that occurs when your parents or the people taking care of you don't provide emotional support and validation for you growing up. So you miss out on learning these emotional resilience skills. In my family, we didn't do emotions at all. We weren't really allowed to feel sad or angry, or we'd be sent to our rooms. And even if we were too happy, it was too loud, and my dad could not handle noise and chaos despite having 5 kids. So we really were expected to just stay in line, do what we were told, and just to keep ourselves occupied. There is a term in emotional neglect that is called the fatal flaw. So if you're familiar with childhood emotional neglect, you probably heard this. And this term is essentially that you feel like if someone really knew the real you, they wouldn't like you. And this is exactly what I felt like. When I heard that term, it really connected to exactly my childhood. I had obviously a really low self-esteem. I didn't have much of a sense of self. I had a hard time making friends. And part of that obviously was I couldn't really emotionally connect with people. I tried to avoid the spiral of guilt and shame, and obviously to avoid negative attention from my parents by becoming a complete perfectionist. If I did something good or I obeyed, I wouldn't get any attention at all. But if I did something wrong, I could count on being noticed immediately. So I really tried to avoid that. I learned in my household that love was conditional on obedience, and I wasn't perfect. So I felt unloved, but I think much, much worse than that is that I felt unlovable.
So we have this picture of how you grew up here. Who is the kid you wanted to be? Because you had no self-esteem. It was hard for you to make friends. You're living with shame and guilt. You're living this obedient life. But if you could have chosen back then the kid that you wanted to be, who would that have been?
I think it would have been someone surrounded by friends who I felt like I always had a lot of love to give, and that I didn't feel loved by anybody else. And I always wanted to do gymnastics and dance, and none of that stuff was important to my parents. So, yeah.
You just wanted to be a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
And you weren't allowed.
Yep.
Yeah. In a sense of kids are to be seen and not heard.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yep.
So eventually you do end up meeting the person that the story is about. So take us, from this point.
Yep. So obviously I didn't consciously realize any of this about my childhood. I just knew I felt like I didn't belong and I was struggling and I felt unloved. That's it. So this leads me, to my high school years, which is where I met my abuser, who I later was married to for almost 20 years. I didn't date very much as a teenager. Looking back, there were boys who liked me, but I was really shy. I was this little country girl, and I wasn't allowed to date people who were in my church. I saw myself as not good enough, so I really kind of just avoided it. I had actually heard other teachers talk about the person that I would get in this relationship with as this amazing student. Before I'd even met him, he would get the top scores on tests, and he was this athlete. He was semi-pro in the sport that he did. Just, all these things that had kind of built him up. And then we ended up having a math class together, and we were put in the same group. And I was so flattered that he would pay attention to me. We started dating our senior year, and my parents weren't very happy about this because he was not part of our church. Things moved super fast, as they do with all of these stories, right? And within 3 weeks, he told me he loved me. I mean, the love bombing was like next level. He would give me rides home from school. He gave me jewelry. He actually even wrote a song about me that he sang at the high school talent show. I mean, I didn't necessarily love all this attention, but I loved feeling loved, I think is how I could see that. I did not know what a red flag was. I'd probably never heard the term red flag. So eventually we both graduated from high school, and I really, really wanted to break this off with him. I wanted to create this whole new life, this whole new space. I couldn't really pinpoint like why my family was so toxic, but I knew like I just needed to get out of this. And I wanted to let everything go. But he convinced me to stay together. And that first year of college, we ended up doing long distance. And obviously, with someone who is controlling like this, even long distance, they're going to try and control you, right? So during this year, he would call me all the time just to check up on me, just, saying like, oh, I missed you so much. He would get really mad if I was going to go out anywhere, even if it was with some of my female roommates, because he knew, like there were boys out there in the world, I guess. And he would just get super jealous if he came and visited and I like even knew boys. This was really when he started to show this jealous side. There was a phone conversation once. We were on the phone chatting, and I have no recollection of what this conversation was about. But he got so angry that he punched a hole in a window in his dorm. And that is the point at which I feel like I could go back and be like, hello, this is not someone that you want to be involved with. Like, you live super far away, you're safe, like stay out. But obviously that's not what happened. I think at that point I just thought, like, he's so dedicated to me. He loves me so much, and that's what I chose to think, rather than acknowledging like maybe there's some issues here.
So from here, he joins your religion. You feel really obligated to him at this point, and your religion also says to marry someone in your religion. This is also showing you that he can change as well, so you can forgive his previous behaviors. Maybe it's his immaturity, possibly. So you're now on this ride, and you feel pressured to be on this ride, and you have no idea how to get off of it. And you have this obligation cycle your whole entire life that's feeding into it as well. And soon you're about to get engaged and then eventually move across the country with him. So what happens from here?
The next 6 months are a little bit fuzzy in my memory. I don't know if I've just blocked it out or it was just I disassociated. But I remember that everything in my being was just screaming at me not to go forward with this marriage. But here again, I have this obligation that I feel to him for all these various reasons. And on top of that, I don't have any other friends. He's isolated me from everybody. And I didn't have my own car. I was using his car to get around. I'm on the opposite side of the country from any family members. And he was also helping pay for some of my tuition. So I really, really felt stuck in so many different ways. I also didn't have a supportive family that I could go back to. I couldn't tell them, I'm struggling with all this stuff because I had never been able to go to them for anything. They weren't people that I felt safe with or that I trusted. I literally didn't have anyone. I felt so alone. I mean, this was like the perfect lose-lose situation, I guess. And I'm not sure that, honestly, Brandon, like that I would have listened to anyone if they had said it to me. I think maybe I was past that point. So we got married. This was at the end of 2003 for time reference. And I think things pretty much immediately took a turn for the worst. I was 19 when I got married and he was 20. So we were very, very, very young. One of my first memories after we got married, we were sitting in the living room, sitting on the couch watching TV. And he told me to go get an orange for him from the kitchen. And I remember this because I remember thinking in my head, I was, this newlywed. I was hoping, well, things are going to get better, we're going to get married and then things are going to get better. There's always this kind of hope out there. But I sat there, and when he said that, I remember I was thinking, this is what it's going to be like for the rest of my life. Like, I am just here to fulfill his demands. When we got married, sex immediately became a huge issue, and it was clearly like the most important priority to him. I later found that he used pornography to the point of what I think was probably an addiction, but I was expected to have sex with him whenever he wanted. And I could not count on going any more than 2 days at the absolute maximum without knowing that I was going to be punished in some way if I didn't have sex with him.
So you told me that when you didn't do the things he wanted, like getting things for him or not having sex enough for him, he'd use the silent treatment on you. And from here, you get 2 jobs while he goes to school, plus you were doing all the housework as well. Things are not even at all at this point. So what happens from here?
I felt like we were on the same team. And if he succeeded, then I was going to succeed. So I wanted to support him and do all these things, you know. So I did end up going back to school full time the next semester, but I kept my 2 jobs, and then I had this full time schedule. So this is really, and my degree was in accounting, so it's not like I had some really super easy major. There were times that I would get up. I had a 5:30 shift in the morning, and he'd still be up playing video games. So even though I was working 2 jobs, obviously we weren't making very much money because we were college students. And he would do things like buy motorcycles, or he would just wear me down. Whatever he wanted, he'd wear me down, and he would guilt me to the point that I gave in. So it was basically like his money was his and my money was ours type of thing. If I confronted him about something, it's not like he told me I couldn't buy something. He would say like, fine, go buy something for yourself. But he knew that we wouldn't be able to pay the bills if I did that. And I was the responsible one. So it's not like, he's really giving me permission. It's like this outside kind of thing where he says it to make me feel like I am in control, but I'm really not. And he knew that, of course, But every second I wasn't at school or at work, which wasn't a lot with that much on my load, I was expected to pay attention to him. And I was so busy that he didn't have to tell me, like he didn't have to control me and tell me like I couldn't go out and do something. All of this just did it for him. Like this was the method of controlling me. I really didn't see rage. I mean, he is an angry person. So I think that was all like throughout my entire marriage and including this time, there was definitely this anger. And I don't think I really defined it as that at the time. But it was very much like, if I keep the peace at this time, and things were pretty calm. I did what I needed to do, and was so busy with everything. I probably didn't have any fight in me. But there's this underlying anger, I think, that pretty much all narcissists have. And going back, I can see it, but I don't think at the time I would have labeled it as that. It was really just a lot more subtle type of things. So here I am, totally overwhelmed. Of course, he has friends and he can go out with them whenever he wants, but I can't do anything without him. And this was a real low point. This might have been the lowest point of my entire life. I had convinced myself that things were going to be better. When we get married, it's going to be better. Or after I start school, it's going to be better. After, one thing, whatever I needed to be resolved, got resolved, it was going to get better. And things weren't getting better. So when they actually were just getting worse, I started to lose hope. I would lay in bed and I would think about all the ways that I could take my own life. I didn't feel like I could get out of this marriage because in my mind, the reason that I wanted out was my husband's an asshole. And that didn't seem like a solid reason. And certainly, in my religion and in my upbringing, you don't leave someone for being an asshole. You don't just give up on someone when you're supposed to be married forever, right? And I asked myself this question: when is it bad enough to get divorced? And this is when that started. In a lot of the survivor stories that I've listened to, the person starts out as like really strong and they get worn down over time to the point where they have been devalued and then get to this point. But in my own situation, my own upbringing, he was just confirming everything that I already thought I knew about myself, that I wasn't good enough, that I was unlovable, that, I should be glad that someone even chose me. And somehow, like I will just feel forever lucky. There was this stubborn, resilient streak that I had that went through all of this to be able to finish my college degree. So I graduated with my bachelor's and my master's degrees in 4.5 years, despite working 2 jobs, despite taking all this time off. And I started working for this amazing, amazing place that really, really valued their employees. And I had female mentors. They took me in, they cared about me. When I was there and I was at work, I was smart and I was appreciated and I had all this potential. There were times when I was trying to complete my degree and I was doing an internship and then I was trying to get my CPA license, which if you're not familiar with the CPA license, it's this series of 4 tests and the pass rate is around 25% for initial test takers. And I desperately needed support. I had friends who, like, I remember one, her boyfriend would come over and like clean her apartment for her so she could study. They weren't even married. Like, you know, I saw this with other people and I would try and ask him, like, can you just do this one little thing? Like, I really need to study. And when I did, and I told him, you know, I'm struggling, he would say things like, well, maybe this is too hard for you. Like, maybe you shouldn't do this right now. But, you know, never was there any type of help or support. I also stopped asking for help because when you ask for help and you're vulnerable and you're saying, like, I need something, which was obviously hard for me anyway, it was so much worse when he wouldn't help me. So this was the point, like very early on, that I just stopped asking for help altogether. And I think this really was him training me to not need anything from him, because he had his own things he wanted to do. And by putting all of this on me, then he didn't have to do it. And also, you know, obviously a form of control.
So I'm just a little bit curious about him, and, you know, maybe I could have asked this earlier, but maybe to me right now, this is a good spot. So, you know, what we're describing here is this person who's jealous and he's, you know, doesn't want to do anything for himself. He wants you to do everything. He's entitled, and, you know, his money is his money. Your money is his money. There's a double standard kind of going on. It's like an I and a we situation here. You're doing everything. You're propping up his life. He's enjoying himself. You are not. So this person, where do they come from? Like, what is his family like? And, you know, just kind of give us an idea of, like, was he come from an entitled place, and what was his role in his family before we kind of continue forward?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Brandon. And I, at this point, knew very little about his background. I mean, obviously I had met his parents, and my impression of that was like, wow, he came from those parents, because, you know, this was back, you know, I'm saying, like, when we had first met, his dad's a pretty gruff guy and his mom is like pretty, I would say, confrontational. And I think it went much further than him. He actually never talked about his childhood. He never mentioned stuff. But after I had gotten to know his mom later in our relationship, her parents were narcissists. That's not my label, like she has said that. And she came from a line of teenage mothers, and she herself had a baby that she had put up for adoption. She got pregnant in high school. So there's this family trauma, like going back generations and generations, right? So that's kind of where he came from. I think there was this huge sense of entitlement. I don't think in his house that his mom did everything and and his dad was super patriarchal. I think instead it was more a lot to do with maybe the sports that he was in, and that he was told, like, he's the best, and, you know, all of this stuff. And people always picking him up when he fell. Like, he never had to just fall and fail. You know, there was always someone that was just propping him back up and telling him how great he was. So, I mean, really, we were the perfect match, like the perfect match made in hell. But with his background and my background, and like him having all these things he wanted to do and being lazy and controlling, and me being the person that he knew would take it. And really, because I didn't have my own sense of self, he could kind of like just swallow me up and just be that person. that he didn't have to worry about someone else's needs or someone else's opinions, right?
So eventually you two have a baby, and it's something that you told me, this is going to be 18 years if I do this, we'll be together. And you thought that was an odd thought for you to have. And once you got pregnant, you started to realize, okay, I can see what kind of cycles are happening, and the abuse kind of shifts a little here, but it's continuously kind of the same. So walk us through what happens, after you get pregnant.
Yeah. So this was definitely one of the better times. And at the time, it's important to note, I think, that I didn't know the cycle of abuse. So during these times, I just thought, things are getting better. And then, of course, it doesn't stay that way, because that's not how it works. So he did not like that the attention wasn't all on him at this point, once the baby was born. And our oldest daughter was super colicky. She cried all the time. I ended up going back to work at 8 weeks because I was told I needed to, quote, help the family. And I was responsible then for daycare drop-off, daycare pickup, getting her ready in the morning, bedtime, everything. And I remember just day after day, I would sit in my rocking chair and I would just hold my baby and think, she's the only thing I have in the whole world. And I would just cry. There was one point during this time that he wasn't getting enough attention, and he did threaten divorce, actually. And he said he had met with an attorney. In hindsight, I don't know if any of this is true, but I think that he knew it would terrify me so much that I could potentially be alone and responsible for this baby, that it was just one more thing that he did to keep me in. A couple of years later, we had our second baby, a boy, and he was, again, it was one of these times that things were a little bit better, and I didn't want to have an only child. So I had grown up, with 5 kids in my family, and I didn't want that many, but I also didn't want an only child. So, of course, this just adds to my already super overwhelming life. I loved being a mother, but I was struggling for sure. 2 kids and a job and no help at home. I want to bring up some of the behaviors at this time, but I first want to mention, from the outsider perspective, we are this young couple. We both have these professional jobs. We're like the power couple, and we have now, at this point, we have a new house and we're driving nice cars and everything looks great, from the outside. But, when obviously they're not seeing some of these things that I'm seeing. So during this period of time, he was waking me up in the middle of the night for sex, even if I just had a baby. I would wake up to him touching me while I was asleep. This expectation that I have sex or I'm going to be punished, essentially, it never changed if I was sick or if I was postpartum, or certainly not if I just didn't feel up to it. When I did ask for help, with the smallest tasks during these times, he would just go on a tirade about how I never appreciated anything he did. I didn't understand how hard he worked, and I was a nag. He would tell me, even my mother didn't nag me this much. And he'd get super upset if the house wasn't clean. So there was this impossible expectation. I'm doing all of this other stuff. And then I was also, expected to clean. But even a step further, he wasn't going to help with it, but he was going to be upset if it wasn't clean. And then if I tried to clean after the kids went to bed, he would be upset that I wasn't spending time with him. So there was really no way that I could meet these expectations. He would tell me I didn't do anything for him. These were his words. And this was usually when he had one extra thing that he wanted me to do specifically. He was always moving the goalpost. So if I did something that he asked, then he would say, he would say that I didn't remember it correctly. Oh, no, that's not what I had said. I told you to do this, or it just, for whatever reason, it wasn't quite good enough. And so it just kept me trying harder and harder and harder, because I wanted to keep him happy and to be good enough for him, I think. At this point, I'm older and I have friends from work. And so every once in a while I would go out with my friends, and he would make me feel terrible. So again, he wouldn't tell me that I couldn't go out. but he would call me a dozen times telling me, you know, the kids need this or the kids need that, or just make me feel like I was this terrible mother because my kids needed me and I wasn't at home. So I would stop going out less and less, you know, and if I did go out, it was so rare because like I knew it was like the special occasion and I was going, it was worth it to me, I guess, knowing that there was going to be this huge trade-off. The absolute worst though was visiting my family. So again, we were on the opposite side of the US from all of my family, and we would see them maybe every like 2 years. And when we would go and visit them, he would be so upset that I wasn't paying attention to him. There was one specific one that was the most memorable. We were sleeping in the same room as our kids. Obviously, we're like on vacation, and he wanted me to have sex with him, and I wouldn't. And he got so angry that he told me I needed to take him to the airport and drop him off, and that he was leaving. And you know, I didn't care about him, and I didn't appreciate him. I finally talked him down off this ledge. But then again, it ruined the time with my family because I was so sleep deprived and upset that I couldn't, you know, even barely interact with people. And somehow everything was my fault too. Like that was a big one at this stage. There were a few times he actually hit things in our car, and I would be blamed for it because I made him angry, and that was the cause of this accident. If he couldn't find his car keys, that was my fault. I must have moved them. Even if he didn't like wake up to his alarm and he had this early morning meeting that he had maybe mentioned to me, he would say things like, you knew I had that meeting. So like, why didn't you wake me up? You know, just everything was my fault.
Yeah. So he is the demand man on the abuser types list from Lundy Bancroft, where his attitudes are, it's your job to do things for me, including taking care of my responsibilities if I drop the ball on them. If I'm unhappy about any aspect of my life, whether it has to do with a relationship or not, it's your fault. You should not place demands on me at all. You should be grateful for whatever I choose to give you. I am above criticism, and I can be a very loving, giving partner, and you are lucky to have me, are the main themes of that. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yep. And I never at this time thought this behavior was intentional. Like that never crossed my mind. So even though all those things fit, and I know now, you know, those are this, every single one of those is this kind of profile of an abuser. I never would have even imagined that he was doing all this intentional. So soon after this time, he received a work assignment and we moved to a foreign country. This was going to be like just this huge windfall for us. It was going to be so exciting. You know, we were this young family and we were going to go on this adventure. Also, I was going to be able to take a break from working, and I'd finally get a break from managing like all of this household stuff, which was really appealing to me after being a working mom with 2 little kids. My kids at the time were 3 and 1, so like very busy. When we moved there, we had a driver and we had a full-time household employee who would help with the kids and the cooking and the cleaning. I mean, I literally went from doing everything and in the middle of my busy season to moving to this place where I had like tons of help. And I convinced myself the biggest problem in our marriage, you know, that was just that he didn't help enough. So now I'm in this position where I have like a ton of help, and I'm thinking now everything's going to be fine, right? So during this time, there were periods of time that he would travel for work. He hadn't really in the past. And I got these little glimpses of what it was like to not have him there. It was so confusing, honestly, because on the outside, like he put himself out there, and most people, I would say, like would identify him as this really nice guy. But at home, it was just such a living hell. He was super good at his job. Like he had friends, he was well liked. But when I saw that, you know, when I had these times away from him, it was like I was just gaining some clarity about who he really was just by being able to identify my feelings and the calm I had when he wasn't around. We had a third baby, a girl, while we were living abroad. And then a couple years after she was born, we moved back to the US. So just for reference, by now it's been about 10 years that we have been married. This time when we moved back to the US, I experienced anger from him like I had never, ever seen. There was physical aggression, not physical abuse. Like, he didn't touch me, but he would punch holes in the wall. He would throw things. He would break dishes. That time when he punched a hole in the wall, it was because I wasn't being sufficiently excited enough about this raise he had got at work. And so he was so angry that I wasn't excited that he started punching things. He would storm out of the house. He'd be gone for hours. So I'd be left with the kids and I would be trying to call him, like, is it, it's okay. I won't do it again, or apologizing, for what I had not done. He would wake me up after I went to sleep. So if we had started kind of arguing about something and then I was exhausted and I went to bed, he would wait till I was asleep and wake me up and then start this argument again, which I never realized was like sleep deprivation is a tactic that these people use. I did start to see more of like that anger and that rage. When we'd have conversations, he would talk to me in this tone that he insisted was this calm voice. And it was so confusing because like I knew that was kind of true, but somehow there was this like seething rage behind his words, talking in a calm voice.
So eventually you do end up going to therapy because you have anxiety and depression issues. So what happens from here?
Yeah, this was the first time, Brandon, that I had told someone I am not okay. Like literally, I was 33 at this point, and just saying that alone, I think, was just like this huge load off my shoulders. Like it wasn't me just admitting to someone else, but it was also me admitting to myself that I wasn't fine. I wasn't okay. I didn't actually bring up my marriage initially when I had started therapy. I really wasn't ready for someone to know just how bad it was. Shortly after this, though, like I was in therapy at this time, I stumbled across a blog post, and it was the signs of being in an abusive relationship. And this was the first time that I realized that my husband wasn't just an asshole, but he actually, this was abuse that I was experiencing. I knew that, there was a big difference between being married to an asshole and being married to an abuser. My kids were just 9, 7, and 4. And I knew like if I was experiencing abuse that I needed to get out. I met with an attorney and I confronted my ex that I wanted to get a divorce. I was so terrified. I think part of it, I was scared of him because this was the period of time that he was showing this physical aggression. I thought I was going to throw up and die, but I confronted him. He cried. He played the victim and was like, "Oh, woe is me." He actually mostly just kind of avoided the topic after, a short little period. And we just pretended like it didn't happen.
So eventually you don't go through with a divorce. Your sibling is going through one, and you just didn't want to overwhelm your whole entire family. And you were also afraid of the unknown, taking care of 3 kids by yourself. You got a new job, and one of your kids is also having behavior issues too. And his behavior was at its best. So you thought maybe he is changing. So what happens from here?
What happened was my ex ended up getting another international assignment. I'm sure he put in for this because it would keep me in, it would help me stay, and he knew that. And so I told myself that I was going to stay for the kids. So my oldest daughter, the one that has pretty significant behavior issues, had done really, really well the last time we had lived abroad in these expensive private schools. And the company covered the cost, and the teacher to student ratio was like super low. So she had done so much better. And I just said, I'm going to do it for her, and it's going to be fine. Like everything's going to be fine. But what happened was I didn't realize, and I couldn't have realized exactly what I was signing myself up for. We were living in China when COVID hit. I was still working remotely for the company that I had started at before we moved abroad. And now here I was trying to manage 3 kids at home, them doing their distance learning, and like obviously just going absolutely stir crazy. And the company that my ex worked for ended up sending us back to the US. This was when we were sitting in China, and we were watching all of these death numbers grow and grow. This was back January, I guess, of 2020. And so they decided we needed to come back to the US while the situation kind of got settled. And my ex came with us, but he had to go back just about a week later. So I ended up stuck in the US with my kids for about 6 months. We didn't have a home here. We were just living in Airbnbs. I actually stayed with my parents for a few weeks, which then added trying to deal with these childhood issues that came up. And we were apart for enough time that the voice in my head that was telling me that I wasn't good enough was actually getting smaller. And I didn't feel like I had to walk on eggshells all the time. And with this new knowledge that like I knew how bad that the relationship was and that this was abuse, I think that this time ended up being like very instrumental in me finally being able to get out. We did end up returning to China after that 6 months, but my oldest daughter was just, it wasn't helping to have her in these private schools anymore. Like her behavior issues were just too severe. It got to the point where, and I mean, keep in mind, like this isn't a small kid in elementary. By this point, she's like 7th, 8th grade. And I'm having to pick her up from school almost every day. So I'm experiencing so much stress and burnout. And then what had turned into a really severe depression that I could just barely get out of bed. I could barely take my kids to school. I wasn't actively suicidal, but I remember wanting to die. And there was one day that I remember I was riding my little scooter. In China, they have like these mopeds that you can kind of take to get around. And I thought, if I just turn into this upcoming bus, everything will be over and people will just think it was an accident. And that was a really pivotal thing for me because I knew that I actually physically could not stay any longer. If I did say anything about me struggling, he would say, yeah, you have such a hard life. Like clearly your life's so hard. And if I did look around, like he was right in some ways.
So eventually, while abroad, you find the term covert narcissism and you start to read everything, and things really start to fit, including ruining holidays and birthdays, things like that. And things start to become more clear for you, and you come to the conclusion that he's never going to change. So what happens from here?
The harshest truth at this time was that no one was going to save me. I don't know why this was so harsh. I don't know why this was like such a big realization, but I thought, no one's going to save me. I have to save myself. So despite, I'm experiencing this depression and this chronic fatigue, I'm getting all this confidence in myself. And I think over those last few years that I ended up being in this relationship, I kind of slowly left. It wasn't this instant thing. And I wish I had been able to get out, 5 years earlier than I actually did. But this was a really important phase for me of just gaining this confidence and identifying these behaviors and just starting to stick up for myself. So I would set boundaries, just like small little things, like super small, even just, I'm not going to wash your clothes if you mix all the clean and dirty clothes, or just not internalizing things if he told me them. I would speak my truth. So like if he would gaslight me, I would just calmly say back, actually, like from my perspective or my story is this, and then leave it at that. It sounds like such small things, just like to tell the truth to someone or do that. But for me, these were huge. I stopped being responsible for his emotions. And when he would give me the silent treatment, this actually ended up being like my favorite method of abuse at this time, because I would think maybe I can get like 2 or 3 days out of this, of him leaving me alone. And now that's like, it's sad to me, but it no longer worked on me. And I think it took him a little while to realize that it wasn't working anymore. And it wasn't making me think like, how can I try harder? It was just a break. Another really big thing I did at this time was building up some savings. I knew that I was going to have this money to be able to get out. And I was worried about my well-being and my health at this time. There was one specific conversation here near the end. We were discussing moving back to the US, and I told him, I don't feel like you care about me at all. And instead of disagreeing with me or like trying to convince me, oh no, I care about you, any of this, he looked at me with absolutely no emotion and he said, I don't know what you want me to say. And that's actually exactly what I needed him to say. Because in that moment, I recognized that everything was transactional. Like our entire marriage, he didn't even have the capacity to care about me. And not just me, but me and people in general were just there to be things, like to facilitate things that he wanted. And everybody was just, kind of a tool in his toolbox to be used for his purposes. So the shit really hit the fan when we experienced the COVID lockdown. It was Shanghai 2022, and you may have heard it on the news if you remember. But essentially, the entire city was going to be shut down. We were given just a couple hours of notice, and we were told we could not leave our neighborhood for any reason. And at the beginning of this lockdown, China was actually separating kids from their parents. So if the kid tested positive for COVID and the parent didn't, they would take the kid and bring them to a COVID camp. The lockdown was supposed to be 3 days, but it ended up being a full 2 months. At this point, I'm having these discussions with my ex-husband that we need to leave. Like this isn't good for the kids. We're all about to, just in this cycle of anxiety, and everyone is just so just on top of each other. There were times that we actually could not even leave our house, so we couldn't even go out in our own yard. And one day I got tired of it, and I ended up booking plane tickets for myself and for my kids, and I didn't even tell my ex for a while. When he did find out, he was so furious. And his reason that he didn't want us to leave was that he didn't want to have to deal with the move by himself. Like that was the reason. So after I went through this huge lengthy process, I had to get permission from what they called the neighborhood committee. And then I had to figure out how to get my passport so I could actually leave the country. We were finally able to leave, and this was on the 45th day. The good thing about all of this actually though was that because he didn't want to leave and I did, I ended up being able to pick where I wanted to live in the US. I did not want to go back to that state that we had lived before that was super far from all of my family and everybody. And so I chose a place and moved here, and I didn't even know if he was going to come back at this point. But he did end up coming back to the US. And it was so strange because he just went like full gear into saying things like, we need to get family pictures done, and like trying to pick out a house. Oh, do you think this house would be great for our family? Just all of this, what I know now is, future faking. But I think despite him trying to tell me like everything's going to, if we got divorced, like it'd be so hard for the kids, and like, just all of these things that he piled on top of each other. I think he thought that I would just give up because it literally had worked for him before. This was now 5 years from the time that I had originally tried to file for divorce. I was at rock bottom by this point though, and I absolutely knew I had to get out. My kids needed a mom that could take care of them, and I was just barely functioning. By this time, I was also having a lot of physical chronic joint pain and a lot of physical symptoms as well. After I confronted him about the divorce, and I was starting to show that I was really serious about it this time, I started by physically distancing myself. So I would sleep in another room. I wasn't really interacting with him very much at all. I found a therapist, and I specifically found someone who was familiar with narcissistic abuse. At this time, I also started working with a personal trainer. This was such a big one for me in getting out, which I know seems weird, but working with this personal trainer, I not only was able to improve my health a little bit, but I learned like I can do really hard things. I also journaled about the abuse that I had experienced. This was absolutely vital because this was the first time I had put all of this stuff together and really seen how pervasive it was in my marriage and how early it had started, and really started to see all of this intentional control that he had over me. I set affirmations, things like I deserve a happy and beautiful life. And another one I had was my kids are resilient, because I was so worried about my kids. My kids are resilient, beautiful, and they deserve a peaceful home. I read tons of books. I listened to podcasts, including this one. I joined some online support groups. I continued making financial preparations to make sure that once we did go through with this divorce, that I could support myself. So I got my own bank account. I got my own credit cards. Another one that was really key that I had forgotten about until I was putting this together was I would sit and I would visualize my life without him. So in addition to journaling, I would just picture how I would be able to live and have this peace in my home, and even like my dream house, all of these things. And it really helped me when I got scared and I had all these feelings of like, I just want to go back and like, why am I doing this? I can't do it. I'm not strong enough. I would do all these things and realize like, no, I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. I also really started focusing on strengthening my relationship with my kids. It's not that I like didn't have a good relationship with them, but from these years of just being so exhausted, I felt like I had missed out a lot on being a mom and being able to do things with them. So I think he was probably spying on me at this time, or checking on me. I don't know if it was like my internet history. I don't know, but he somehow knew that I had kind of found him out, and I think he knew that I had figured out that he was narcissistic, and probably also by the fact that I wasn't reacting the same ways that I had before to him. I wasn't giving him that supply. I wasn't just putting my needs last anymore. And I was so incredibly fortunate. Once he knew that I had figured out who he was, he really just turned incredibly cold to me. Like it was as if he just literally one day it was someone I didn't, that he didn't even know me. I mean, that's kind of how he was treating me, which was fine. But there were so many half truths, and a lot of these he brought up. And some of these things were that like all marriages have problems. And I think at another time in my marriage, this would have affected me more if I hadn't been able to say, yes, all marriage, like to add that, but all marriages have problems, but not all marriages are abusive, or not all of these behaviors are intentionally controlled, Another one was, he would say like that I wasn't perfect either. Like I'm not 0% to blame and he's 100%, which is, it is true. But also, I mean, the person that I was in this abusive relationship, I'm not saying that I never did anything wrong, but I was definitely a different person than I am now also. And he said that I was getting divorced over one incident. That was a weird one that he brought up. Like we would have this disagreement, and then he would tell me, "Oh, you're going to get divorced over this one incident." So we did end up. I initiated the divorce, and we were so fortunately able to make it through mediation. The only reason I think I even was able to not go through the court system was that I had a detailed knowledge of our finances. And I know that the vast majority of women, especially in these narcissistic relationships, have also experienced financial abuse. So I'm super grateful for that. But it also went back to when he had required me to do everything in the household because he was lazy. That also included managing money. And the first week that we got married, he bounced our rent check. And so that was the point that I took over finances too. And what ended up being him putting all of this on me and everything being my responsibility was one of the big factors in me being able to get through our divorce. So that was kind of a silver lining, I felt like.
So eventually you do end up getting a little bit of a healing process here. So tell us about what happens after, mediation and the healing aspect of things, and maybe little things that he did in the aftermath as well.
Yeah. So part of my healing actually started by facing him in mediation. We did it all virtually, which was nice. I didn't have to be in the same room with him. But by this point, I was so exhausted. I drank several energy drinks, before and during it. So I had my energy drink. I remembered that affirmation that I had that 5 years prior. And I made a new one and I put that up, and I had that up during mediation. So I had that and it said, I am strong, I am beautiful, I am enough. And then I had my notes. So I went into each of these sessions. We ended up having, I think, 5 or 6, and sticking up for myself. And but being able to do this myself, I think, just gave me so much of my power back. I did have an attorney on the side, and I would go to her with my questions or to review documents. But I knew, if we brought attorneys into this, it was going to get really ugly. So I also knew, because I had this upper hand knowledge of our finances and he didn't really, I knew it was going to be possible. Money was so important to him. He didn't want to spend money on something like this. But also, it had to do with his image too. He had this image of being this nice guy, and everyone thought he was such a nice guy and a family guy. And so he didn't want to destroy that. Between these mediation sessions, I would read books on negotiating with a narcissist. So those, obviously that's really fun reading. But I knew I was going to have to be one step ahead of him. And I was also going to have to make him feel like he had won. We were never going to get through with this if he felt like I was winning, right? The narcissist just, that's the fundamental nature of a narcissist, is they have to win. So I made sure when I was doing with this that I had cards that I could bring up later on. And one of these was a $50,000 bonus. I know he had already earned this from work. He worked for a buddy. So I knew he was just holding on to this bonus until everything was finalized. And so I did end up needing a lot of these things. Near the end, I brought up the 50,000 when he wouldn't agree with alimony, and we couldn't get anywhere. And I was worried, oh my gosh, are we going to have to end up going to court? But also, I figured out up front what was important to me, and I wrote it down, and I knew exactly what was the most important to me and where I was giving a little. And I am so proud of myself for sticking to that. I did not, even though hopefully at the end he felt like he won, because that's totally fine with me. I knew that I had negotiated what was the most important to me. One thing that I did end up doing was agreeing to 50-50 custody of our kids. So that was really, really hard for me. But I was fortunate at this time. My kids were 15, 13, and 10. So I knew that they could take care of themselves. And I also didn't feel like I was doing them a favor if I went into this huge, huge court battle over this. So that was one thing that I just ended up agreeing on. Also, at this time, I could barely take care of myself. I felt terrible about conceding to 50-50, but I also really needed that time. And I'm kind of grateful to have that period of time that I could recover. And so on those weeks that I had my kids, that I could actually be a functioning mom. So he immediately moved on to someone else, which ended up being great for me, because for the most part, he has totally left me alone. He's still very cold to me. It's we're people who just met, basically, or, maybe a little colder than that. This person that he did end up finding needed a visa for her and her daughter to stay in the US. So of course it moved super, super quickly. And then he got her pregnant, potentially before we were even officially done with our divorce. And I feel super bad for her. I know she thought probably that she was getting into this relationship with someone that was super nice, this family guy. And so, I see myself in her a lot. I also feel like my kids are safer with her there, and that someone is there taking care of her. So that worked out super well. And it's also been very, very validating for me. I honestly thought like I was going to be fine after all this was done. Like once I got through the divorce, the mediation, all of this, and everything was going to be great. And I was just going to, I guess skip away happily ever after or something. I guess it might have been a little bit too grandiose of a vision for myself, but really what happened was everything just caught up to me. So I ended up just crashing into this bigger depression, chronic fatigue. It was worse than actually what I had experienced before. And it took me a while to realize, and I did this with the help of my therapist, was that what really I was struggling with and what I was going through was this really, really deep grief. And that kind of surprised me because I wasn't grieving this marriage. Like I was so happy to be out and I was proud of myself and I was in this so much better of a situation. But I realized that I was grieving an entire life of being in these toxic situations and these struggles, and where that everyone that should have unconditionally loved me and been there for me and supported me, they never were. And so it was like I had to start from nothing essentially. And of course, because I had stayed so long, I also had this physical pain and all of these health things. So I have been diagnosed with PTSD through therapy and medication. That's part of what I did after I got out of this relationship. And it really took me a while to just get out of the fight or flight mode. I was in survival mode, I think, pretty much my entire life. And so I think my expectation that like I was going to finish this and then I was going to be fine was just very unrealistic. And that's something I want people to be aware of too. I have other friends that I've talked to that have experienced something similar. And if trying to convince yourself like life is going to be so much better once you're out gets you out of the relationship, that is true, and you can hold on to that. But I think it's important to recognize that you have been through a lot, and that things aren't just going to magically be fine once they leave. Like there's still going to be a lot of things that you have to work through, and there definitely were for me. Yeah, I think the first thing was just realizing it wasn't my fault. Like all these good qualities that I had that were used against me, it wasn't my fault. Honestly, like I can say that regardless of how I was treated, that I didn't lose my ability to be kind and to be caring toward others. And that's something that really has helped me. I also have dealt with recognizing that the emotional neglect that I experienced as a child had a huge impact in me getting in this relationship, but also like in staying in this relationship for so long. And so I'm trying to reparent myself and build up these skills that I had never learned so that I don't repeat this pattern again. And I understand emotional resilience. Another big thing is just forgiving myself. And most of that is forgiving myself for staying, because I did stay so long. And part of that was like that first time when I look at that and I'm like, oh, if I had gotten out 5 years earlier, how much better off I'd be. But that's not especially helpful. So kind of working through that. Another thing is I have a lot of anger toward my own parents and toward this religion that I briefly mentioned, at different pieces, but I felt like looking back, like this was a huge contributor in me getting in and staying in this relationship. And this patriarchal, what I had learned, that I was there to support my husband, or all these messages that marriage is, forever, and you have to stay in, and you have to keep going, and you don't give up on people. It really was very damaging to me. And so I'm working through that. Remembering that question that I had, like, is it bad enough to get divorced? I look at that now, like, as part of my healing process. And I realized, like, it had always been bad enough. Like, before I got married, it was bad enough to get divorced. And really any relationship I can recognize now, like, if it's bad enough where your self-worth is being damaged, and especially, if that other person isn't showing remorse, or they're clearly showing that there's no real change, it's bad enough. Like, there doesn't have to be physical abuse. There doesn't have to be infidelity, and there's like not a specific number of boxes that you have to check. And obviously you don't even have to label it as abuse. Like, the sooner you get out, the better it'll be. So I think that's more of the part of my healing that's like moving forward, being able to recognize what a healthy relationship is and what a healthy relationship is not.
And if you had any words of wisdom for everyone listening, what would they be?
Yeah, I have 2 words of wisdom. I mean, it's more than 2 words, but the first is to just be kind to yourself. I felt like the best thing that I did, and the best thing that people can do to get out of an abusive relationship like this, is to just build up their own self-confidence. Like, you have to show yourself that you're fine without your abuser. And you have to take really small steps at first, like just tiny, tiny steps to take care of yourself and put your needs first and slowly break free from this person. And then the second one is remembering that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Even though, like, when you're in these times, everything seems impossibly dark. So I want to leave with some words that I found in the journal that I had wrote to myself. This was before my ex had even moved out. And I wrote, "I will create a future for myself full of light, hope, and healing." And I want everyone to recognize that the strength and courage that kept you in this relationship and being able to survive this relationship is exactly what you need and what you have within you to be able to leave and create that life for yourself.
Well, Poppi, what people can't see today is you. I can see you because we're using Google Meets. We're not using Zoom right now. And how, difficult this was for you, and that there's emotion going on your side. Not maybe everyone could hear that because you're taking pauses, throughout when things might start to feel like they're getting overwhelming, but how difficult it is to share your story, how difficult it is for you to tell your story, and, all of the emotions that go around it, because this isn't just 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. I mean, this is a big chunk of your life. We're talking about what, 15, 16, 17 years of your life.
20 years being married.
20 years being married. Yeah. That's a big chunk of your life to live in a prison, and, I'm happy that you're out of that. And I know you're struggling with PTSD, and, talking to me today and sharing your story is a big step. Has to be cathartic for you to like just kind of let it rip and get it out, and to help other people, because your whole life you thought that you didn't have value, and some people started to give you value along the way with that job that you had, but today you're giving value to other people. You're giving people validation, and even though your experience has been terrible, it's gonna help other people who are in these situations. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I'm sorry, you know who I am. But today you did a really good job, and there's a lot of people out there that share your identical story, and you're going to give them hope today. And I just would really want to thank you for being here with us.
Thank you, Brandon. It's been 2 years, I want to mention, since I've gotten out, and I can see at this point that this has been a shift from dealing with all of this and processing it, that I've gone kind of full circle, and now I'm able to reach out and be on the other side where I'm capable of helping other people. And so I'm super grateful for that, and for you allowing me to share my story.
Well, thank you, Poppi, for being here once again. And if you want to be a guest like Poppi was today, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com and click on the guest form button at the top of the page. And there you can read all of our instructions, and please read them all and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our guest form and press the submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. Also, at our website, we have a support group. So if you need support, we have a support group at narcissistapocalypse.com. Inside, you'll see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. It is a wonderful group of people on there, and you can make a lot of friends too. So if you need support, join our support group today. And if you need even more support, please do visit our friends at domesticshelters.org. At domesticshelters.org, they have articles and resources to help you make sense of everything that you're dealing with. And they have every phone number, email address, and web address for shelters and agencies. No matter how big or small the town you're in, domesticshelters.org has it there. So if you need extra support, please do go to domesticshelters.org. And we have other friends of the show called Shelter Movers, everyone. And Shelter Movers can be found at sheltermovers.com. And what they do is they help you move all of your stuff from your home into storage, and that can be your pets and livestock too. So if you're dealing with domestic violence and coercive control and need to get out, you need help leaving the home, getting all of your stuff out of your home and into storage, sheltermovers.com can help you do it all, including your pets and livestock too. They're only available in Canada, and it is a donor-supported charitable organization. So if you need help from them or just want to donate to them, go to sheltermovers.com. And that is it for today's survivor story, for today's episode. So for myself and Poppi, we hope you have a good night.